All right, let me pause because that's not making it in the video. All right, what's going on, people? Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Busters. Today is Wednesday, August 31st. I'm one of your hosts, Will. This is Eric. Eric, how you feeling today?
What's up, everybody? I'm feeling good, man. I'm excited to get into kind of a continuation of what we did in our last video, some more draft strategy. I think that's going to be really useful for the people out there. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
Hell yeah. We're starting to get down into the nitty gritty of, fantasy football. Drafts are starting. As you guys know, if you watched our last episode, which if you haven't, check it out. Also, like, comment, and subscribe. But we're just going to be going over some actual draft strategies that we use. I actually did my first one a couple days ago. Eric and I are going to do ours for our league in a few days. So this is just us sort of, I guess, giving you our insight as to how we process and how we think. But we also want to go over some NFL news before we get into it as well, just because we haven't done that in a little while since we did our last breakdown. So I guess we can go ahead and kick off with that.
Yeah, there's been a lot that we haven't talked about. In the preseason, things move fast. So first piece of news, I'm going kind of in backwards chronological order, things that happened most recently to when we last brought this stuff up to you guys. So Damien Pierce appears to have locked up the RB1 role in Houston, and a surprise cut at the deadline, the roster cut down deadline. Marlon Mack is off the team now. So Damien Pierce feels securely in that RB1 role. Rex Burkhead is still there. He might not have the full passing down role, but he is skyrocketing up draft boards, and I think he deserves it.
Absolutely, 100%. I think we had talked about Damian Pierce yesterday because we had done a mock draft, and I forgot when I had drafted him. I think it was maybe the seventh or eighth round, maybe even been the
Mm-hmm.
ninth. But that's definitely going to go up from here after this news. I feel
Yep.
bad for Marlon Mack, though, man. He's been just trying to get a job, just trying to get on a football field and play, and he just hasn't been able to do that.
Yeah, man, these Achilles injuries are tough. We'll see if the advances in medicine and like the way that James Robinson and Cam Akers have come back, if their recovery timetable and what they look like is different. But it's tough to bet on guys with these Achilles injuries. Marlon Mack is getting cut 2 years removed from the injury. Deonta Foreman can't beat out Chuba Hubbard, who had a terrible year last year. I don't know. It's a rough look, but yeah, Dameon Pierce shooting up draft boards. I think he's still probably a target. I think he's going to be one of those late risers that really
Mm-hmm.
doesn't rise to where he should be. I wouldn't mind taking him maybe as high as even like the sixth round. I've definitely seen him go higher than that, but that's probably about my limit. I've been snagging him in like the eighth round of a lot of these mock drafts that I've been doing, but it's definitely not going to be there anymore. Next piece of news from Rap Sheet, J.K. Dobbins, quote, week one status certainly in doubt. This is something that we've been preaching for a bunch of videos now.
Since our first video, I believe.
Since the literally the first video that we put up on this channel over a month ago at this point. Yeah, he's still not practicing in full. He's still not doing team activities. He's only doing individual drills. He did avoid the PUP, but it's looking like he might not be there for week one. The team just brought in Kenyan Drake as well. It's another piece of news that we put on here, in addition to Mike Davis. So clearly the team is concerned. Um, I don't know. How do you feel about this backfield and how it's going to shake out early on in the season?
I think it's just going to be just the committee. It's going to be whoever's healthiest, whoever can touch the ball on the field is going to be the guy playing running back. Like they got Kenyon Drake in the building. They got him a physical. He passed it without a hitch, and they're signing him immediately. I believe they're either signing him today or they signed him yesterday. I can't remember when I had heard the news, but
Yeah, I think they brought him in yesterday and signed him yesterday, which is quick turnaround.
yeah, it's absolutely crazy.
Um, yeah, I think this is one just for depth. They struggled last year with a lot of injuries, and so they want to make sure they're not in a bad position again. They got Gus Edwards on the PUP. He's going to be out for the early part of the season, at least 4 weeks. J.K. Dobbins potentially not going to make it for week one. I think this might also be a sign that they're willing to bring J.K. Dobbins back slowly, which is probably what they should do, kind of ramp him up and not throw him straight into the league or straight back into a game action before he's ready. Um, so I think for J.K. Dobbins, the player, and like long term, it's probably good. But for his fantasy outlook for this year, as we've been saying, I'm a little bit nervous.
Yeah, definitely agree there. It's not a situation to be confident in for sure. And then
Yeah.
just our next
Yeah, go
piece of
for it.
news, we've got Jalen Waddle. Injury is still undisclosed, and he still hasn't been practicing. Is this a cause for concern? I'd say yes, just because we are getting as close as we are to the season, to the start of the season, and we have no idea what's going on with him yet. We just know that it is a leg injury, it is a lower body injury, but we don't know sort of the extent to which it is, or what it even is, what is even injured.
Yeah, this one's getting sketchy. The team has come out and said that it's like precautionary. They're just trying to keep him safe or whatever. But like, it's not a precaution anymore when he's been out for 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks at this point. Like, if he can't practice for that long, like, there's at least a somewhat significant issue. I'm worried about it. I already had him a little bit lower in my rankings, so I don't know that I'm moving him down too much. But this is definitely something to monitor, something to keep your eye on, just to see when he's going to be able to come back. Um, I'm probably not taking him in that fourth round range where he's going right now until I hear more about this.
Yeah, it's way too, it's like you said, it's way too sketchy of a situation. We just have no idea what's going on here. And we're what, a little bit over a week away from the start of the season, September 8th?
Yeah,
So, yeah, I need this to clear up before I can look at Jalen Waddle as like, as a fourth round pick, as high as he is going. You know what I'm saying?
right.
So, we've spoken about Kenyan Drake already. Kind of already talked about that one a good bit. Does Kenyan Drake getting signed by the Ravens, does that impact Kenyan Drake's value to you at all?
I mean, not really. Like, people had been talking about Mike Davis as like a late round kind of pickup and stash just to see, I don't know, for week one, for the early portion of the season, because he might be the lead back. I think Kenyon Drake is probably a little bit better, but also, like you said, I think this is going to be a committee. I think they're going to run together. It's not going to be good for fantasy either way.
Yeah, it's a great football situation, but not a good fantasy one. And
Yeah.
just to move on to our next piece of news, which was probably one of the most shocking that we've seen in a little bit, the 49ers extended Jimmy Garoppolo for an extra year. I believe it was 1 year, 6.5 million,
Yeah.
making him the highest paid backup in the league behind Trey Lance.
So, note on that. People
Uh-huh.
say highest paid backup in the league, but we forget about Sam Darnold, bro.
Oh my god. That is a guy. Holy shit.
He is the highest paid backup in the league. Although
Okay.
currently PJ Walker is the backup because Sam Darnold's dealing with a high ankle sprain.
That's true. I forgot all about that. Fucking Sam Darnold of all people. How do you feel about this Jimmy Garoppolo move? Because I felt like it doesn't instill too much confidence in Trey Lance, at least.
Yeah, so I've been back and forth on this one, and so has Twitter and all of social media. People have been kind of on different sides of this argument. I think it's a good football move by the 49ers. I think from everything that they've said and the way that they've gone about this offseason, they've made it clear that Trey Lance is the starter, and I don't think that that's changed. And I think Jimmy knows that. I think Trey knows that. I think there's respect between the two. Trey Lance has come out and said that he's happy about Jimmy coming back, and he's learned a lot from him. He's gonna be happy to have him in his ear, during the season and stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm.
more than anything, I think this is a move for the 49ers to still be able to have leverage in trade talks. Instead of just letting him go, they'll be able to trade him early on in the season if a quarterback goes down or if a team realizes their quarterback situation is worse than they originally thought. Cough, cough, Seahawks. Um, yeah, I think this is just a power move by the 49ers. They also have a really good backup that's led them to multiple NFC championship games sitting there in case Trey Lance goes down. He's got that running quarterback style. So he's a little bit more susceptible to stuff like that. And also, if they keep him the whole season and then they end up releasing him or his contract ends at the end of the season, they get a compensatory third round pick now. So I
Mm,
think it's just a really smart business move and football move by the 49ers. I'm not any more concerned about Trey Lance than I already was.
true.
If Trey Lance is good, he's going to be the starter and he's going to play every week. If Trey Lance is bad, he would have been bad anyway, and he might get benched for Jimmy, but it doesn't change a lot for me.
Yeah, I guess that is a good way to look at it. It's just a good move on the 49ers part. Gives them a little bit more leverage. And then they got a great insurance plan. It's a
Yeah.
great insurance plan. So that does make some sense. Next we've got the Jaguars traded Laviska Shenault to the Panthers. Me personally,
Gross.
yeah, this doesn't do anything for me. It's Baker Mayfield throwing the ball to Laviska Shenault, who, to be completely 100% honest, I'm sorry to any Laviska Shenault fans. I'm sorry to Laviska Shenault if you ever end up seeing this. I'm just not convinced that he's a good football player. So for me to say that this move means something would mean that Laviska Shenault will have had become a good football player overnight, and that just hasn't happened. So it's a movement
Yeah.
to the Panthers that shouldn't really affect all too much. It's a fresh start for Laviska, but we don't know what that means until we see him actually take a step up.
Yeah, I'm with you. The numbers say he's a bad football player. A lot of the film guys that I follow on Twitter and respect for their work say he's not a good football player. He obviously showed flashes in college. That's why he got drafted as high as he did. It's a fresh start, maybe a new coaching staff, a new scheme. Being in a situation like the Panthers where they really don't have too much behind DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, they're definitely looking for more wide receiver help. Maybe he can step up, but I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah, it's a movement, but we don't know what it really means yet. you know,
Probably means nothing for being real.
Most likely. Just like our
Yeah.
next set of news, the Colts released Philip Lindsay. Shocker. We all thought Philip Lindsay was going to be the RB1 for the Colts this year, right?
See,
RB2
I, I
even.
don't I don't think that this means nothing. I think it means nothing for Philip Lindsay. I don't think he was gonna factor in really anyway. But from what the Colts have shown us throughout the preseason, from the coach speak,
Hmm.
from the beat reporters, from the way that they've played on the field, they're showing us that Nyheim Hines is like he might get a workhorse role if something were to happen to JT. Like I was under the impression early in the offseason when they brought in Philip Lindsay that they like Nyheim Hines a lot. They think he's a weapon. They want to get him involved in the passing game. But if JT were to go down, Philip Lindsay would probably fill in with the early down role. Nyheim Hines would stay in that similar third down back, satellite back type role. But man, they rode him in the preseason every down, every single down. So I think this bumps up Nyheim Hines' value a little bit.
Mm.
I like him in a similar vein to like a. I guess it's not quite the same. I was gonna say in a similar vein to Darrell Henderson, but Darrell Henderson might just straight up take that job from Cam Akers. We'll see. Um, but yeah, I think Nyheim Hines is a really, really good handcuff this year.
As I say, I guess that kind of pushes Naeem Hines into more of like a Kareem Hunt type of role.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, agreed. I
Okay.
like that comparison.
Okay.
And similar news with kind of similar implications. Sony Michel, also a surprise release by the Dolphins. Another thing that I didn't put on this list, I saw this morning, he's actually going out to the Chargers and visiting with them.
Mm.
That might be kind of interesting as, a guy that could spell Austin Eckler. They've been looking for somebody to do that. So we'll see if he lands there. No word on that yet. But as far as his release from the Dolphins, we mentioned this a little bit during our mock draft show on the last episode. I don't think that this changes too much for Chase Edmonds, except one thing I didn't mention on the last show is that this does open up like goal line work that I thought may have gone to Sony Michel. Now they don't have like a big back. It's Chase Edmonds, it's Raheem Mostert, and I guess Miles Gaskin still
Yeah.
on the team.
I was surprised to see
Um,
Miles Gaskin make the roster after they had brought in
Same.
7 running backs. I didn't think he was going to make the cut, but he did.
Yeah, I think Salvin Ahmed also stayed on the roster, which was really surprising.
Makes no sense.
So if that's any indication that like Chase Edmonds or Raheem Mostert might also get the red zone and like end zone carries, that could be huge for them. Um, But really, I didn't think that Sonny Michel was going to cut into what Chase Edmonds was going to do on the season anyway. I think that this might be a boost for Raheem Mostert just because he's going to be able to get on the field more, and he has that familiarity with Mike McDaniel, the coaching staff, the system, and stuff like that. So I think he's probably like a really good last round or late round pickup.
Yeah, I like that take. I like that take a lot.
And then we go on to some Juju Smith-Schuster news. He does return to practice. This is something that we've been talking about a little bit. He's had some issues with his knee, and I think this is dating back years now.
Mm-hmm.
It's still not really. Nobody's come out and said like what the issue is, but it seems to be a chronic, kind of recurring knee issue where like after games, after practices, whatever, he's got knee soreness. It's not like an injury where they say, oh, he like sprained something, but he's got knee soreness and he's having to sit out. And I've heard that he's had to get it drained and stuff like that. So this scares me from like a long-term perspective that this might continue to get worse throughout the season. You know, it'll be nagging him and we don't know when he's going to sit out, when he's going to play. It'll be like constantly a questionable designation on him and you're just hoping he's going to make it that week. Maybe I'm blowing this out of proportion. I want to know your thoughts as well.
No, I agree with that. You never really want to see knee issues from a wide receiver. It's one of those positions that they got to do a lot of cuts. There's a lot of high impact, a whole lot of explosive movements. So for him to be dealing with this knee issue, it's concerning. I'm sure all the extra TikTok dances and stuff like that also hasn't been helping Juju. I'm sure that's also brought him back a couple steps.
Yo, chill, dude.
Than he should be. You know, who knows where
He's
his knee
hanging out
would
with
be.
Jackson Mahomes too much.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're going crazy out there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I was never super confident in Juju to begin with. I don't think he's been getting drafted higher than he should be. He's been kind of sliding down as time's been going on, especially with this knee injury that popped up. But I also feel like I don't know, a lot of people are high on Juju going into the Kansas City offense because he's going into the Kansas City offense. But I don't know how conducive it's going to be, especially if we don't know how often he's going to be on the field, if it's going to be an issue that can keep him off of the field. Like you said, he's got to get his knee drained. We've seen this with Todd Gurley where it's just we thought he's going to play and they sit him out because he just couldn't. It's a game time decision. And they're trying
Right.
throughout the game to try to work him in and they just couldn't get him in there.
Yeah, I think that that's good to bring up. I don't necessarily want to draw that comparison quite yet because we don't know. Like we were told that Todd Gurley had arthritis in his knee and it
But
was degenerative.
but we were told Todd Gurley had arthritis in his knee after it became an issue. I'm pretty sure. I think we learned he
I
had an
guess
arthritic component after they sat him out in the Super Bowl and everyone was like, what the fuck is going on?
yeah, no, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah, it's tough for me with Juju because I'm kind of on board with him having a breakout year. I guess not a breakout. He's already done it in Pittsburgh,
Mm-hmm.
but kind of a bounce back year with a huge quarterback upgrade from late career Ben to prime Patrick Mahomes. And like all of the training camp reports when he's been on the field have been, praising him like crazy, saying he's making a ton of plays. All the training camp videos that we've seen, he's looking like, prime Juju. I know that we haven't seen that in a little while, and people have kind of labeled him as now like this slot guy, only underneath, not super athletic. But he is athletic. Like he shows that on his profile. He showed that during his first 2 years in the league when he put up a top 12 wide receiver season. I think that he really could have a great season this year if he can stay on the field. So he's not a total fade for me, and if he drops to somewhere where I'm not too worried. Like if he ends up hurt and missing a bunch of games, but I take him in like the eighth round or something like that, that's fine with me.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's just I've seen drafts where he's gone like the like the fifth, sixth round. And that's a little
Yeah,
bit too rich for my blood in this situation. But an eighth
I
round
think
pick, like you said, like almost not a stash, but a backup or a bench player,
yeah,
definitely worth it in that instance.
and I'm not saying that that's necessarily realistic. I agree with you. I've seen him go in the fifth and sixth. I think the sixth is still like a reasonable spot to take him. It's just I'm worried with the names that go around him there, like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Godwin, Michael Thomas, stuff like that. Like if those guys are healthy, they're gonna probably do just as well. So tough for me to take him in that range, but has the upside, I think.
Fair. That's fair.
And then we go from former Steeler to current Steeler, Naji Harris. They're saying should be fine after dealing with a Liz Frank sprain. This is one that we got news on after the fact. We heard early on in training camp that he got stepped on, and that he was dealing with a foot issue. Apparently, this was the foot issue. It was Liz Frank sprain, but he did come back and play in their last preseason game. He's been practicing for the last week or week and a half or so. Mike Tomlin has come out and said it's a non-issue. The fantasy doctors that I follow on Twitter have come out and said that this is probably at most a minor issue. I'm not too worried about it. I don't think this really affects his fantasy outlook.
Yeah, I agree. Najee Harris, we saw him play in that last preseason game. He looked like himself. He was still trying to hurdle over people. So it's just, yeah, he's gonna be okay. I believe he's not gonna deal with any type of injuries unless something happens during the season. So I don't. This, like you said, the foot injury now is sort of a non-issue. They're just gonna. He's either toughing his way through it or it's not bothering him anymore.
Yep.
And then going
You
from
want to take that?
a starting running back to a backup running back that people talk about every year, the Vikings calling teams about or teams are calling the Vikings about a potential trade for Alexander Madison, the backup for Dalvin Thomas. Dalvin Thomas, what the fuck? Dalvin
Dalvin
Cook.
Tomlinson, the defensive tackle. Dude.
Yeah, bro.
Hell
What the
yeah.
hell? For Dalvin Cook.
Yeah.
Damn. How does that affect anything for you? Because honestly, I feel like Alexander Madison in the right situation could be a starting running back on a few teams.
I agree with you. I think that in Dynasty, I've been seeing some people say this on Twitter and stuff like that, that Alexander Madison is a buy. If he does end up on the move, he'll probably go to a situation where he's either the starter or in a committee to be able to start. I'm not 100% sure that I really believe in him, but I mean, he's shown it in limited opportunities when he's had the chance to be the lead back whenever Dalvin goes down. So I think it's a good opportunity for him if he were to move on. This is something that we've been kind of calling out, like that he might not have that backup role behind Dalvin all to himself. Now that they drafted Ty Chandler, they also have Kene Nwangu, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who they really like also in that backfield. So they might just be clearing space. As far as like a handcuff to Dalvin Cook, if he goes, then I think Ty Chandler is probably the guy to target. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm taking away from this news.
Yeah, it's just about the same for me. It's not huge news, but depending on the situation that he goes to, it could be. So it's just something to keep an eye on if it does end up happening. Um, are the Vikings trying to shop him, or are teams just asking if he's available?
Obviously I don't have the inside sources to tell you for sure. I think the Vikings have come out and said that they're not actively shopping him and that they'd be more than happy to keep him on the roster, but that they're open
If the price is right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what they're saying publicly, but who really knows? I think this also like if we're trying to draw comparisons, Dearness Johnson out in Cleveland, there have been some rumblings that he might be on the move as well. I think he's in a really similar situation where he has shined in his opportunities when he's gotten to be the guy. And if he goes somewhere, he could potentially be in a committee or even be the starter somewhere. Similar type play, dynasty buy. I just picked him up in my dynasty league, so I like snagging those two guys, stashing them on your bench if you can.
I'd say I'm a fan of that as well. And we also learned recently that Darren Waller has an extension of $16 million a year in the works. So it kind of leads us to wonder if this hamstring injury he's got, if it's really a hamstring injury or if it's a hold-in of some sort. Now, not a hold out because he is with the team. He is still communicating with the team, but he hasn't been practicing. So what do you think about that, Eric? Because I did think this one was pretty interesting too.
This one has been very interesting to me. So he hasn't been practicing at all. He hasn't been there for training camp except for, I think, one practice. And for a long time, for the first 2 or 3 weeks of training camp, it was totally undisclosed. Nobody knew what he was dealing with, why he wasn't practicing. He was at the facility, like you said. And then we get news that he's dealing with a hamstring injury. And then a couple days later, they're like, all right, he's back and practicing. and then the next day he's not at practice anymore. It's like, oh crap! Like, did he re-injure his hamstring? Like, this is going to be pretty bad for him going into the season if he already had something and made it worse. Could be weeks, could be month, whatever. I was getting nervous. I have him on my dynasty team. I need my boy to be healthy.
Yeah.
But then news comes out not too long after that he's like firing his agent and hiring, I think, Drew Rosenhaus, and now they're talking about contract extension in the works. Dude, I think it's just a hold in. I think he's been chilling. Maybe he was dealing with a minor injury and he just doesn't want to push it because he's not getting paid like he feel like he deserves to be. But I'm under the impression that he's fine, and once he gets an extension, he'll be ready to go.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's some sort of combination of the two. It's like he got some sort of minor injury that he was like, all right, bet this is my opportunity to just hold
Not
out.
doing nothing.
Yeah, it's like, y'all want me to play through this, man. I mean, I can do that for 16 million. 16 million, I can play through it. But like that's definitely how it shook out for me too. I was like, yeah, this is a hold in situation, which is kind of hilarious. I like this route actually a lot more than the hold out situations.
Yeah.
The holdout situation, I've never seen a holdout go well. I don't believe. Have we seen a holdout actually be successful yet?
I mean, I'm off the top of my head, I'm having trouble thinking of any. Like Melvin Gordon, kinda like he got his money eventually, but it took a lot longer than I think he expected. I'm sure there's examples. I'm blanking on them.
I have to do some research on that. But this Holden stuff right here, I like this. I kind of
Yeah,
like the flavor of this one.
yeah,
And then speaking
um,
of unfortunate injuries,
yeah. A little bit more of a serious note.
yeah, speaking of unfortunate injuries, we've got Brian Robinson Jr. of the Commanders. As we know, earlier this week, he was shot in a apparent carjacking slash robbery situation. He was shot in the glute and the lower leg, and I know personally for a lot of Commanders fans out there, a lot of Washington fans, when we got the news that a player on the team had gotten shot, I know a lot of us, I know my heart dropped. I was sort of
Yeah,
feeling like that whole Sean Taylor situation all over again. Rest in peace to Sean Taylor. But things were a lot more fortunate this time. The injuries were kind of defined as non life threatening for sure. The bullet that hit him in his lower leg hit him in the knee, but fortunately for Brian Robinson, it missed all vital points of the knee, so no bones, tendons, ligaments. None of that was hit somehow, so that's a miracle in itself.
yeah.
And
No veins or arteries either. He wasn't. He missed everything. It sounds like.
yeah, and I think I read a news article about who it was that it shot, and it was two kids, like 15 to 17 years old.
Really, I didn't even know that.
It was two kids trying
Damn.
to carjack him. Apparently, carjackings have been an all-time high in Washington D.C. So, if you live in that area, have some caution. People are definitely out there. I know Brian Robinson was definitely targeted because he was driving a Hellcat, which people know is a Hellcat when they see it. They know somebody who's driving that has money. But fortunately, he was able to avoid any. I'm not going to say any type of major injury because he was shot twice. That is a major injury, but he was able to avoid any long lasting damage from that injury. And as recently as yesterday, he was back in the Commander's facility, not practicing, but just there with the team. He brought his rookie snacks to the running back room. So it just kind of goes to show like he still loves this team, still wants to be a part of this team, wants to get back out there as early as he can. But the team is also not going to try to rush him into that situation. They're kind of take him through his paces, let him heal up the best he can. But he has not been ruled out for this season, so that is good news.
Yeah, yeah. This is a fantasy football show, but clearly the person Brian Robinson is more important than the football player or the fantasy asset. It's amazing to hear that it's non-life threatening. The fact that he's already out of the hospital, back in the commander's facility, is so good to hear. As far as what it does mean for fantasy, since we're gonna have to talk about it. Antonio Gibson went from seemingly in the doghouse, losing his starting job, to now probably being thrust back into it. Um, I think it's still scary for me to take him, especially after just what we've seen this offseason, kind of a lack of trust from the organization, worried about the fumble issues, worried about his consistency. Um, they don't have another back that's really going to take any early down work, though. They got J.D. McKissick. They just cut Jarrett Patterson. So I think there's a significant role to be had there. What are your thoughts? Are you moving Antonio Gibson significantly up your boards? Where are you taking him?
I would move Antonio Gibson up a little bit, but not a lot, just because of, like you said, the injury concerns. And I do believe that when Brian Robinson is good to go, which I think is going to be earlier than some people might expect, he's going to be put back into that role of the primary ball carrier. I know it's going to sound like I'm making a joke, but there was an eyewitness statement from the shooting who had seen the carjacking happen. And one of the comments that they made was that Brian Robinson was extremely fast in leaving the scene, which I don't know too many people who were getting shot in the knee and still running very fast, but apparently Brian Robinson is one of them. So it's not me saying, oh, they're getting him out on the field ASAP. He'll be back week 4. It may be half the season. It may be 3/4 of the season. But the fact that Antonio Gibson has struggled as much as he has, they cut Jarrett Patterson, so obviously they didn't believe in him really as a rusher. They never really did. He was more of a special teams guy and all that. And there's a lot of running backs kind of floating right now in free agency. There's nothing to say that Washington doesn't even go and pick up a Philip Lindsay or a Sony Michel even to fill in
True.
sort of that early down role because, to be honest, Antonio Gibson has not been that good. He hasn't been good. So it's
Yeah.
just if this does move Gibson up for me, it's only marginally because I just don't know if the team trusts him. That's the issue.
Yeah, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. I just came up with a little draft day situation you might find yourself in. I'm not sure what my answer is yet.
Okay.
Antonio Gibson after this news, or Ramondre Stevenson.
Oh, that's tough. It's actually really tough. I'd probably go Ramondre Stevenson if I'm looking at a season long outlook.
Yeah,
But
I
again,
think I'd probably lean that way too.
that's under the gun. But at the same time, on draft day, everything's going to be under the gun. So it's like that's probably what I would go with right there. It just seems like the more viable and more productive outlook going into the
Yeah.
season. But
Yep.
we're hoping for a speedy recovery for Brian Robinson, not for fantasy purposes, not for even Commanders purposes, but just for, typical human being purposes. It sucks to see somebody like this. It sucks, especially a rookie. It sucks to see them
Yeah.
catch their stride and then get sidelined like this. It's
Yeah.
it's crazy, but we're hoping for a speedy recovery, and yeah, we're gonna get back into some more news and hopefully get a little bit more lighthearted with it. And
Upbeat, positive. Yeah, we'll start with the motherfucking Geno Smith named the starter in Seattle, dude.
hasn't gotten his
I don't know
jaw
what they're
broken
doing.
yet.
I don't know what they're doing, man. I mean, I guess I understand it over Drew Lock. They don't have a lot of options, but trade for Jimmy G already. Get somebody that's actually worth a damn in there.
Oh, fuck that, bro. I saw some clips, man. Put Pete Carroll back there at quarterback. You see that clip? Put Pete Carroll back there, man. I want to see some different shit. Fuck it. At this point. Yeah.
look like Pete Carroll. I can't even say his name. Pete Carroll of old, looking like it's the 1950s again.
Yeah, man. Looking like the 1920s, old Leatherhead Pete all over again, man. But yeah, Geno Smith named the starter in Seattle. I mean, we kind of knew he was going to be the starter for a while. They had been hinting towards it. He had been starting every preseason game, which is why we tell you guys preseason games are important. They show you how teams are planning on using players. And Geno Smith has been nothing but the starter for most of the preseason. I believe they started Drew Lock one game, but that was because Geno
Yeah,
Smith was dealing with something, wasn't he?
So, they wanted to get Drew Lock some reps. They wanted to give him an opportunity. I
Right.
think they wanted to do it even in week 2 of the preseason, but he had COVID, and so they had to wait till week 3.
That's right.
But then he comes out
Drew
and
Lock
throws
was
2
last.
picks. So, against backup defenses is just not a good look for Drew Lock.
So he's immediately out of there again.
Yeah. Next piece of news. This one, we just brought up Ramondre Stevenson, and I think he's going to be a topic of discussion in regards to this one. Ty Montgomery was carted off in their third preseason game due to an ankle injury. We don't really know the severity yet. Bill Belichick has come out and said that he doesn't expect it to be serious. I think he might have been, I can't remember if he said day to day or not, but basically he's saying he expects him to be back at practice in the near future. We'll see if that actually comes to fruition. But Ty Montgomery was carving out a serious role in that backfield. it was looking like a three-headed committee with Damien Harris, Ramondre Stevenson, and Ty Montgomery as the third down back and getting a lot of the passing work, which was like opposite of the hype that Ramondre was getting throughout most of the offseason. Um, so it's possible that if Ty Montgomery's injury is a little bit more serious, that Ramondre could, have that passing down role all to himself. But if Ty Montgomery comes back healthy, I think he's eating into that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I looked up the quote for Bill Belichick just to see what it was that he said because I never saw that he had a quote, so I just wanted to see. And it's sort of a Pete Carroll level quote, but in a Bill
Mm.
Belichick kind of way. It's So this was Monday morning. He gave this quote. Today's Wednesday. We haven't practiced since we've been back here, so we'll see how things go today. See what he's able to do, but I think he's doing all right.
Yeah. That yeah.
Which,
Sounds like Pete, even though it's not.
yeah, it's just I guess it's encouraging, but at the same time, we've kind of talked about this before too. It's hard to trust any news coming out of New England because they
Yeah.
are so shrouded in everything that they do.
Super tight-lipped about injuries.
Yeah, so he very well could be just in a boot and not practicing whatsoever, and we probably never know until the beat reporter
Yeah.
does get eyes on the situation and reports
Yeah.
something at least. But right now, it's just we're keeping an eye on it. Like you said, it would cut more into like Ramondre Stevenson's receiving outlook than anything, but I think the team. I think the team is going to lean more on Ramondre Stevenson, probably more towards the future, be more future forward. But Ty Montgomery could, like you said, factor into that at least a little bit.
Yeah. And then our last piece of news, Michael Gallup, shockingly to me, avoided the PUP. The PUP this year just means that you don't play for the first 4 weeks. I thought for sure he was going on that. I didn't think there was any way he was going to be able to play during the first 4 weeks. This doesn't necessarily mean that he will, but it's a pretty positive sign for his recovery. It means the team thinks that he's got a shot at it. What do you think about this, Will?
I think him avoiding the pup, like you said, it's good because it doesn't guarantee he's going to be out at the beginning of the season. But we still don't know if he's going to play before week 4.
Yeah.
It makes me a little bit more confident in his situation, though, that he is progressing well. He's not somebody that I'm going to be worried about too much going into the season when they do decide to start him. I think it is a good sign to show that, like I've said, he's progressing well through his injury and through his recovery. That he may be able to get back in there and be an impact player immediately.
Yeah, and this is encouraging to me too because, early on in the preseason, early on during training camp, news was that Jalen Tolbert was looking really good. He was on his way to locking up that wide receiver 2 slot while Michael Gallup was out. And, he was going to be on the field in most of the 2 wide receiver sets. A lot of that noise has kind of calmed down. People are saying Noah Brown might have him beat out for the wide receiver 2. People are saying he might not have even beat out Semi Fehoko, or however you say his name. I think he's a sophomore wide receiver for the Cowboys as well. So Jalen Tolbert news not looking as positive. So like, if Michael Gallup were to come back early in the season, not that Michael Gallup was going to lose work to those guys anyway, but like it's a clear, glaring need for them at wide receiver 2, and he'd probably step into it right away.
Yeah, and they're gonna need him to. They're gonna need him to. Like you said, there's
Yeah,
a steep drop off between CeeDee Lamb and the next guy up.
yeah, yeah. So that'll do it for all the news. I think we're all caught up. We've been trying to keep you guys up to date throughout the entire preseason and off season. I hope you've learned a little bit from that. But now we'll move on into our draft strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll probably start with like optimal positional targets from early, middle, and late picks in the draft. So I'm going to hand this one off to you, Will, because in our league that we're going to have this weekend, you got the 3 picks, so you got that early slot.
Mm-hmm.
What are you looking to do from a positional standpoint throughout each round of the draft?
So, from a positional standpoint, each round of the draft, since I have an early pick, when you have one of those early slot picks, a lot of the people look at the running back position. They want to pick one of the more solid running backs in the league, someone who is going to be a workhorse back. At least that's what I like to look for. I feel like there is a lot of scarcity between an elite running back to some of the more middle ground, okay running backs or just more serviceable running backs. So, with the cliff being as high as it is between the tier 1 running backs to not so much from tier 1 to tier 2. There is a little bit of a cliff there, but not a huge drop off. but definitely from like that tier 2 to tier 3, there does start to be more of a difference. So from those early spots, from like the 3 pick, usually every year, I think in our league, this is the first time I haven't had the second pick ever, which I've been kind of spoiled like that. But I usually like to take one of those solid running backs, so I do go running back heavy to start out with, or running back. And if I get to that second round slot and I feel like I have hit that cliff from like tier 1 or tier 2 to tier 3, and I see that there is a maybe tier 2 wide receiver or tier 1 tight end, I'll start to move more in that direction too. So I think I don't really go RB heavy so much as I do like anchor running back. I like to get an anchor first for the team. So that's probably more
Yeah.
of my strategy. And we'll talk more about what those terminologies mean later. But I'd say that if I had a draft style, it's more so like it's more of an anchor running back into figuring out my team from there.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot. People this year, especially in your half PPR and PPR leagues, are going to be wondering whether they should take, a Cooper Kupp or a Justin Jefferson after guys like JT and C-Mac go off the board. And I think in full PPR leagues in certain formats, if you're starting three wide receivers, have a bunch of flex spots, then that might be a viable option. But especially when you're in those early picks 1 through 4, a lot of times you're not going to get like a good like tier 2 running back come back to you again. So I think it's important to lock that up early. If you can get a JT, a C-Mac, an Eckler, a Cook, whatever, because you might not get a Leonard Fournette that falls to you in the second round or a Javante or something like that. So I think that that's a good strategy. Lock up that position early, and then, like you said, you can try to get your onesie positions out of the way, whether it be a tight end or a high-end wide receiver early in the draft. I'll talk about the middle since I have the sixth pick in our draft coming up, kind of like the 5 through 8 slots. This is where I do like to target those wide receivers early. I think that there's enough of a drop off between those kind of top 4, 5-ish, depending on how you look at it, running backs and the next tier of running backs. Especially if you're in half PPR or PPR formats, I'm taking a Cooper Kupp or a Justin Jefferson in this slot if they're available. And then I think because you're in the middle, you're close enough to that turn to where I think one of those tier 2 running backs will still get back to you. That's been my strategy in all the mocks and like the leagues that I've done so far is I'm taking a Justin Jefferson or a Cooper Kupp and hoping that one of those tier 2 running backs gets back to me in the second. And employing a similar strategy to you, Will, where you talked about like a hero or an anchor running back, where I won't necessarily worry about that RB2 unless I get some crazy value fall to me in the third. A lot of times I'll target a tight end like a Kyle Pitts or something in the third, and then really crush the wide receiver position from like rounds 4 through 6 or 7. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I
Um,
definitely agree with that. Especially if you guys watched the mock draft we did yesterday, you can kind of see a lot of this stuff in action. See it literally happen as we go through the draft. So check that out if you
yeah,
haven't yet.
for sure. You want to talk about the late picks like 9 through 12?
Yeah, I'll talk about 9 through 12. It's sort of similar because the league that I was in that I just drafted for, I was in the 8 spot, but that's in the 10-team league. So a little way different actually because there's still a lot more talent left. But I kind of like I like the swing spots a lot. Swing spots are always cool because with a late pick like that, this is where you get into more of your RB heavy sort of drafting positions. Because when you're in
Yeah.
that late spot, you sort of have that second tier slash third tier of running backs, but you've got them for that entirety that you're in there drafting at that start. So it is very easy for you to get a 10 slot and go, maybe you want Alvin Kamara and Aaron Jones, or you want DeAndre Swift and James Conner. It all depends on how it falls for you. But those swing spots are a good opportunity for you to go running back heavy if that is your if that is your prerogative, you know? So that's something that I like to look at, especially in those swing spots. In my draft that I had this past weekend, I was able to get in the 8 spot, and it's going to sound ridiculous, but this is sort of you knowing your league and knowing the people you're playing with. I was able to lock up Dalvin Cook in the first round at the 8 slot, and then get DeAndre
Wild.
Swift on the turn in the second round.
And
And
then the most wild.
yeah, and then the most wild is in the third round, I was able to come back and get Saquon Barkley. So in terms of
What
running
is good?
backs, yeah,
What is good with that league,
in terms of running backs, I went very running back heavy, but the rest of my team was still able to shape out because I was still able to get wide receivers like Mike Williams or Marquise Brown, or and I was still able to get Travis Etienne later in the draft too as another running back backup. So it's not a bad plan to go with, as long as you know your personnel, you know what you're going for on your team, because it is easy to get players in that swing spot if you play it right.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to bring up. It's something that we'll talk about more a little bit later on, is not locking yourself into a single strategy and just letting the value fall to you. Because in that case, I'm sure you weren't planning on starting three running backs. Like
No,
you got Dalvin Cook and who'd you say your second running back was?
I got Dalvin Cook and DeAndre Swift, and I was
DeAndre Swift.
I was fully planning on either getting a tight end or maybe even like Michael Pittman in the third round. But then I saw Saquon sitting there, and I was like, I can't pass that up.
Yeah, if he's sitting there, take the value that's fallen to you. Like it's okay to stray away from your original strategy if you know you're getting a top tier player like that. So I think that's a really good strategy, and I do think that kind of robust RB heavy strategy is more suited to those later round picks.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of your optimal early round strategies when picking from different spots of the draft. Again, if you didn't see our mock draft video in our last video, go check that out. We break this down way more in depth and do the whole 12 round draft. And so kind of more diving into these strategies specifically, we mentioned like robust RB. So that's basically where you want to lock up a lot of those high tier running backs, because like Will said, there's a pretty steep cliff when you get to that running back dead zone.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have the elite guys, you have the workhorses, the guys that are out there on every down or get the passing work, whatever. And then you get to like the middle of the third round, the fourth round, and you're getting into guys like David Montgomery, who, yeah, he might be an every down guy, but Khalil Herbert is, trying to work in there. The coaching staff is believing in him. It's a bad team. You get your Elijah Mitchells, your Cam Akers,
Mm-hmm.
guys where injuries are an issue, where situations are uncertain, teams are bad, scoring opportunities aren't there.
So
You don't want to waste picks on these guys.
yeah, you got your Brees Halls who aren't even starting yet, going in the fourth
Yeah.
and fifth round. So it's just something that well, I don't want to disrupt your train of thought. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was wrapping that up anyway. Like robust RB is just securing typically three running backs in the first 3 rounds, and then you're pretty much set at that position. Like, yeah, you want to get some depth maybe at the end, but then you can really just attack the middle round wide receivers, which I think is where most of the value is this year anyway. You can lock up those onesie positions in your tight end and your quarterback fairly early and try to get positional advantages in those spots. I think it's a viable strategy, especially when you have a later pick in the first round.
Yep. And then getting into that, hero anchor RB that we had talked about, it pretty much stems from you wanting to pick up the best running back possible that you can get on the board. So you typically have an earlier pick, somewhere like in that 1 to 4 range, 1 to 3 range. It's the Jonathan Taylors, Christian McCaffreys, Derrick Henry possibly, Dalvin Cook possibly, Austin Eckler possibly. I've seen all those people go from 1 to 4, so I think all of them sort of qualify for that anchor RB/hero RB role. Those are the guys that you absolutely know for a fact they are the guy on the team. They're not going to anyone else unless they go down. So like Jonathan Taylor, he's going to be on the field. Nyheim Hines is going to get worked in a little bit, probably more so than people imagine, but he's going to be the workhorse back for the Colts. Now, going into the rest of your draft strategy, you've got your anchor for the team. That is your player who's going to be carrying you week to week. So the rest of it is just kind of seeing how the rest of that draft falls to you. Since you know you have such high capital in a running back on your team, you're kind of going value based for the rest of the draft. So if you get to that next slot, because you have that one pick, you're going to be waiting a long time before you pick again. So it puts you in a spot where either if you want to go running back heavy, there's a chance you're going to be reaching for somebody who isn't really worth that second round pick. Same with wide receivers. You might be reaching because at that point you're into that other tier of wide receivers where they're kind of all going to be doing the same thing. So it's just a matter of looking at the personnel that you have in front of you and taking the best player, or at least the best value for what you're going to get for that player. So, like, for example, in our mock draft we did yesterday, just a little bit of a spoiler alert, I had picked Derrick Henry in the first round in the 3 slot. When it got back around to me, I picked Mark Andrews.
Mark Andrews.
Yeah. I picked Mark Andrews because he was the best value left at that point. He's a super high-end tight end 1. It made sense for me to pick him in that slot. So I think out of all of these with the hero slash anchor, it's sort of the one where you got to be the most knowledgeable. You got to be the most flexible when it goes into those other picks. But I mean, what do you think about that, Eric?
I think it's probably the one that can be employed from any draft slot. I think you're probably right. Yeah, you got to be the most knowledgeable. You got to be prepared going into the draft, because you can get into sketchy situations where you're kind of locked out of the running back position for your RB2 slot if you're not careful. But it's probably for this year the strategy that I'm going to employ the most, and I think we both kind of used it in our mock draft last video. Um, I agree with pretty much everything you said. The only thing I would change is that I wouldn't necessarily exclude like
Later
that second
round,
tier of running
later
backs,
picks. Okay,
yeah, from being like your anchor running back. Like, yeah, obviously you want it to be the very top of the top. But for me, I would still consider what I did in our mock draft, where I took Justin Jefferson in the first, Leonard Fournette in the second. He was my anchor. He was my
true.
solid RB1 that I believed in. And then I went off with tight end. I think I rattled off three straight wide receivers. I went quarterback, and I didn't take my RB2 until the seventh round in Chase Edmonds. Now, I got a bunch of late round running back values that I really like that I think can fill that RB2 slot. And my wide receivers, my tight end, my quarterback were all loaded. Plus, I still had Leonard Fournette as my RB1. So this is a draft strategy that I really like, something that I do pretty much every time from the middle rounds, but I think can be employed from a bunch of different positions.
Fair enough.
And then that leads us into probably the most controversial strategy, and I think one that I I don't really support in almost any format, but especially if you're in a standard typical league, this is one to avoid. But zero RB is what we're referring to.
Yep.
Um, there's been a lot of hype going around these past couple of years. It's gaining a lot of steam. I think it's more for best ball and for like tournament play where the strategy is a little bit different, where the roster composition is a little bit different. If you're in a position where it's a full PPR league, there's three starting wide receiver slots, multiple flexes, then this is a strategy that I think could be more viable then. But in a league like the one that we just did a draft for and the one that we got coming up this weekend, where there's only two starting wide receiver slots, there's only one flex, I'm almost never going zero RB. Later on in the video, I think I'm going to bring up a potential strategy if you get yourself caught in the situation where running backs fly off the board and you don't see any value there. But how do you feel about the strategy as a whole?
Uh, y- we've always talked about, at least in all these videos we've done here, how Eric and I typically go running back first. We like to, get our anchor for the team and then figure it out from there. Zero RB is, to me, it's the scariest strategy out of all of them, just because there is so much doubt to be left, or even just the fact that like the running backs you're working with later in the draft are in more uncertain situations than the ones going earlier in the draft. Not to say that this is a bad situation, like Eric said, in those three wide receiver leagues, PPR leagues, it is a viable option because you do have the Cooper Cups of the world who are going to go out there and get 20 points a game. But there is a whole lot of room for the one year that I had gone zero RB. I picked DeAndre Hopkins and I picked Juju Smith Schuster, and that was during both of their down years. So the rest of my team was in shambles after that because it was the two guys I was depending on to produce that had always produced, or at least shown that they would produce. They didn't that year. And
Yeah.
that's very much a reality with just any football player that's on this draft board. I'm not going to say that's exclusive to wide receivers at all. But at the very least, I know that a running back is going to be involved in the game. You know, there are
Yeah.
games where a wide receiver might get targeted two or three times, and that's a reality that you got to live with. You got to be okay with that, and you have to be okay that maybe a wide receiver that you picked early isn't gonna be the guy that game, and it just is what it is. But it's
Yeah.
just it's not the safety blanket that running back first is.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just gonna say it's probably the riskiest strategy that you can take. I made a mistake. I said that this is probably more viable in best ball. I think that's the opposite because in managed leagues, this is probably when it's the most viable. When you have the ability to churn the waiver wire and find those, kind of running back breakouts like an Elijah Mitchell last year or
Mm-hmm.
Philip Lindsay from years ago, whatever. That's when zero RB can actually be decent for you. But I would probably recommend straying away from that in most of your standard home leagues. But just as an example, so Will, if you want to put that draft up there, I did a sleeper draft where I kind of forced myself into a 0 RB just to see what it would be like. So I had running back go crazy early. I took Justin Jefferson as I would in my normal draft slot at 6. Let me pull it up so I'm looking at it as well. I got it right here. So yeah, I went Justin Jefferson. You know, all of the top tier running backs went before that, and then after that, Joe Mixon, Naji Harris, DeAndre Swift, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Javonte Williams, Leonard Fournette, all rattle off the board before my next pick. I'm not gonna reach for a James Conner or Ezekiel Elliott or that next tier of running backs when I'm sitting there at the middle of the second round. So I took Stephon Diggs, starting off with Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, and again, James Conner, Ezekiel Elliott, the same guys that I just talked about that are in that next tier, go off the board again before I get to my third pick. I'm just going to continue to let the value that's falling to me get to me, and I'll take it, be happy about it. I'll take Kyle Pitts in the third round. And then Etienne and Breece Hall and David Montgomery, the guys in that next tier of running backs that I have, go off before my next pick. So again, I'm just going to take the value that falls to me and take DJ Moore. And through the first 4 rounds, I don't have a running back. Now is when I want to start targeting, but again, still not reaching. A.J. Dillon is a guy that I think has a lot of high upside this year. If something happens to Aaron Jones, I think he vaults himself up into the top 5. And he's got a lot of standalone value by himself anyway. And so basically what I'm saying is, like, don't panic. This is something that we're going to talk about more. You don't want to find yourself panicking. You want to be prepared. Listen to our videos, watch our videos. Hopefully this helps you out, gives you more confidence in these situations. Have your own rankings, have tiers especially, so you're not reaching a tier below when you should be looking at a different position. But yeah, I just loaded up on these late round running backs that I like a lot, and A.J. Dillon, Chase Edmonds, Rashad Penny, Darrell Henderson. And I'm going to find a way to scratch and claw with great wide receiver play and Jefferson, Diggs, and Moore, and really good onesie positions in Kyle Pitts and Jalen Hurts. They're going to carry my team. And I'm going to churn the waiver wire and try to find those Elijah Mitchells that came out last year and try to find the Phillip Lindsays that came from years ago and fill out my running back position that way. So it's not the end of the world. I feel like this team ended up okay. And you just don't want to panic and take guys that aren't at a value.
I have to say, and while looking at this team as well, he went very wide receiver heavy to start with, wide receiver tight end, but at the same time, he still got people like Rashad Penny, who's right now the starting running back for the Seahawks. Kenneth Walker's still recovering, so Rashad Penny's going to get a lot of burn. Darrell Henderson is in a 50-50 split technically right now with Cam Akers, so he's somebody else who's going to get a lot of burn.
Akers isn't even healthy right now.
Yeah, so it's just there's still a lot of value to be found in these other players. But the fact that he is as strong as he is at the wide receiver position, he should never have to worry about that whatsoever. So
yeah.
There's pros and cons to be found with each and every one of these strategies. It's just whatever works best for you and whatever it is you plan for. So that's kind of going to roll over into just us talking about just draft day situations and how to get through them if something happens, right? So the first thing that we want to just hammer home is don't have a certain player or certain strategy locked into your head and think that that is the one thing I need to do. I need this player. I need this. I need that. It's going to force you to make bad decisions because you're not going to plan otherwise. You're not going to be flexible enough to see at least the big picture of your team because you got to be able to see around the issues that you have on draft day.
Yeah, I think this is super important, and it's something that we've been kind of hinting at already throughout the video is you want to roll with the punches. You want to let the value fall to you. I'll make an admission. Last year, I got into one of these panic situations. I was on the board, and we were still in a standard league at that point. We hadn't gone to half PPR. I really wanted a running back in my flex spot. I happened to be super high on Damien Harris, and my co-host here took him just a couple picks before me, and I started freaking out. He was the guy that I had labeled as a late round value. I figured he was definitely going to make it to me. I was like, how did Will also have the same idea? Anyway, I traded. You can trade draft picks in our league. I traded too high of picks to get to Damien Harris, who ended up being fine. He had 15 touchdowns, but he wasn't very efficient. And I ended up missing out on Cooper Kupp last year. If I had stayed in that slot, who Will ended up taking in that trade. If I had stayed where I was and just listened to my board and let the value fall to me, which is what we're preaching for you to do, I would have ended up with Cooper Kupp. And I probably would have ended up in the championship that year. I also took Jamar Chase. My wide receivers would have been loaded. you ended up with Cooper Kupp and Debo Samuel. What a combination that was for you.
That was a great team, man. We couldn't pull through. We lost by 1.2 points, man, in the
Yeah.
championship. 1.2.
But anyway, taking my misery and my panic example, I'm gonna make sure not to do that again. I'm gonna be more prepared and just make sure to let the value fall to me, listen to my board and my rankings, and I advise all of you to do the same.
Absolutely. And that kind of rolls over into the next one is just know your league, know the people that you're drafting with, know your league mates. I'm not saying, do your homework and check every draft board, do this and that. That's something that me and Eric actually do. But
Yeah,
we did that yesterday. But it's something that's important because it's kind of going to tailor what your strategy is going to be. You got to know if people in your league like to draft running backs early. If every running back's going to be going in the first round, what is it that you do? How do you fit into that situation? How does the rest of your draft board shape out if, people draft the way you draft? Because you're not going to be drafting against people. If you're watching this video, if you found our video and you're watching this, I would consider you a high level fantasy player because, to be honest, we're not the most popular group out there right now. So the fact that you found us and you're watching this video, you care a lot. That's not something everybody in your league is going to do whatsoever. There's some people who may not even know football all that well. I've seen leagues for the last maybe 2-3 years ago where people were still drafting Le'Veon Bell with the Jets as like in the first round, and it's like that's
yeah,
absolutely ludicrous. But
yeah.
people go with names because they're the names they've heard for years, and people will still do that. So just know your league, know the people that you're drafting with, know the people you're playing with, and let that tailor your draft. It's sort of how I was able to get Saquon Barkley in the third round in that other league because I knew people wouldn't value him. They have a lot of recency bias and think that injuries are going to play a big factor, and it's probably not. And they probably made a huge mistake with that, but it is what it is. But you got to know your league and know what you're working with.
Yeah, I think that that's a huge factor, especially when looking at early round strategy. That's another thing when we're going into our league. This is going to be our 10th year now, so we've been together for quite a long time. I know that my league mates love running backs early, and so it's pretty important, especially for my hero RB strategy, that I make sure to lock up one of those top guys before they all go flying off the board. And so that's something that I'm keeping in mind as part of my strategy going into this weekend.
Absolutely. It's just know the people you're playing with. And one of the biggest things, I just added this to the list, so this is probably Eric's first time seeing it too since he scrolled down. But leave your bias at the door. It sort of plays into what I said where people were still drafting Le'Veon Bell just because he was a name. There's somebody in your league, probably someone in your league that's going to draft Julio Jones thinking, oh, he's going to be the Julio Jones of past. He's in with the Buccaneers. He's got Tom Brady now. And that's not going to be the case. It's just not going to be the case. He's not going to be that same player that he was then. You have to let value fall to you. You can't try to create value in a player just based off of what you believe about them because that just might not be true. There have been people who, like last year, a lot of people probably valued Allen Robinson higher than he should have, but they shouldn't because the situation was what it was and the team had already shown you how they were going to use him as a player. So you have to trust what is shown to you and what the stats are before you can just trust your own biases towards a player or towards a situation.
Yeah, and I think this comes into play. This all kind of meshes in together, which is why this is an important topic to go over. Homers, knowing your league with homer picks, people are going to take players from their favorite team, or if that's you, if you want to take players from your favorite team, I recommend that you don't do that. Not that you shouldn't just blindly not take any of them like I do with the Commanders, because fuck that. But like, don't just take players because you like them or they're your favorite player. I feel like, again, if you're listening to us right now talking about draft strategy, if you've listened to our other videos, this probably isn't an issue that you guys are running into, but know your league mates. If they're coming in and you know that they're a huge Packers fan or they're a huge Chargers fan or whatever, and they're going to draft those guys early, factor that in. And if that's something that you find yourself doing, it's fantasy football. It's supposed to be fun. If that's what you got to do to make it fun for you, then sure. But if you're trying to win your league, take value, not the guys from your favorite team.
Yeah, it's just me personally. I think Eric does too. I like to pick. I don't like to pick players from my own team because I don't want to go into a week where I'm like, oh, I got to start them. I got hometown pride. everyone's going to conflate things more than they probably should. So I like to pick players that I have no real attachments to, or maybe even they're one of my like favorite players in the league because of how well they do play. That there is a difference to be found in that. Like I like DeAndre Swift, but he also happens to be a very good player. So I'm not gonna let DeAndre Swift go just because I like him. It's just you gotta know, you gotta be realistic. You gotta know what's going on. You can't expect, oh man, uh, Jahan Dotson for the Commanders. He's going to be the best receiver in the league. We got him in the first round. He's a first round talent. We're playing against the Jaguars week 1. He's going to go off for 300 yards. I'm picking him in the 5th round. That doesn't make any sense. So you got to be a little bit smarter than that.
Although I will say Jahan Dotson specifically is kind of a decent value in like the 11th, 12th rounds.
Yeah, where Jahan Dotson's going is fine.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah, is there? I think that wraps it up for us. We also had don't lock yourself into strategy, but we mentioned that a bunch. If you're don't go into a draft saying I am going to go robust RB or I'm going to go zero RB. You can plan on it and you can hope for it, but if it doesn't fall that way, don't force it. Don't take people that aren't at a value just to fit your draft strategy. Like I said, roll with the punches. Take the value that comes to you. We've been saying it all video. You already know what's up. So yeah, it's just be water, roll with the punches.
Yeah, and if you can, if you got the wherewithal, if you got the time, try to plan for all 3 of these. Plan for all 3 scenarios. See what all 3 of your teams could look like. Do some mock drafts to see what possibilities you could even come up with. Because chances are, and that was something we noticed in our mock draft video yesterday, I felt like our mock draft actually went worse than it would in our league. If that makes any sense. I feel like we would have done even a little bit better in the league versus the mock drafts just because it was as scattered, or it is random. But again, that's just knowing the people that you're playing with as well, too.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really good point. Mock drafts are supposed to be there for experimentation, supposed to be there to make you uncomfortable and try to help you build confidence in uncertain situations. So don't go into every mock draft and just try to build the perfect team, although that can be kind of fun. But sometimes force yourself into situations there so that if that happens to you on your real draft day, you know what to do. You've been there before, you've been in that situation. So I think that that's a good strategy to employ when doing mock drafts is make yourself uncomfortable on purpose.
Yeah, very much agreed. Because this is, like you said, you gotta be fluid. When you start to actually have fun with drafting and learning how to just roll with the punches, pick players, your personnel, this and that. That's when you can really start to have a lot of fun with drafting and putting together a team because it's sort of like fitting together a puzzle. But you just got to know what pieces you're working with. So, sort of with that being said, Eric, do you have anything else to add before we go ahead and outro it out here?
No, I think we covered all of the draft strategy stuff. I think that this was a good part 2 to our mock draft video, so you can get the full picture, the full spectrum heading into your drafts this week or this upcoming weekend. I hope that you can employ some of the stuff that we've mentioned today. If you've already had your drafts, we mentioned this in the last video, but please send us your teams if you want us to grade them, if you want to talk about them, whatever. Be part of the community. We'd be more than happy to help you out and talk to you in that way. Obviously, if you got something from this video, give us a like, throw us a subscribe. That would be much appreciated. And yeah, I think we're going to continue to run it back with some more draft strategy videos as we get further into the weekend and closer to the NFL season.
Yeah, and then we'll be upgrading some rankings as well, and we'll keep you guys updated with how our drafts and stuff go as well, so you guys can see our teams, see what we came up with. We can kind of put our money where our mouth is, So, yeah, I'm really excited, man. We're right around the corner from football season. If you made it this far into the video, we're about an hour in. We actually went like 30 minutes
so much longer
what we wanted to, but it just goes to show, man, this is good stuff. I feel like we're giving you guys some good information. And let us know if any of this has actually helped you as well. Like, we really want to build a community. We really want to help people and just, I don't know, we want people to love fantasy football as much as we do because it's something we talk about just about every single day. Me and Eric are sending news back and forth to each other, laughing about coaches, all of that.
We have so much fun with this, man. It's such a good time. I'm so happy that we get to do this now, where we get to come on here and talk to each other bullshit about football, and I hope that y'all enjoy it as well as much as we do. So that's what we're trying to do: spread the fun, and everybody have a good time with fantasy football. So If you enjoyed, like I said, give us a like and subscribe. We appreciate you. We love you for sticking around. And I think we're going to just catch you in the next one.
Hell yeah.
Peace.
Peace.